One of your colleagues from 2009 was Colleen Clark, who's sitting a couple of seats to your left. Then Deputy Director of Emergency Services for DHS in 2009, who oversaw the establishment of the Victorian Bushfire Case Management Service. As we all know, 7 years is a very long time in politics, and can you believe it? Colleen's now Prime Minister. Well done, congratulations. Premier Burgess, you want Colleen's advice about how to establish a similar body, this time called the Case Support Service, or CSS, because we love an acronym. Prime Minister Clark, what was it like for you putting the Victorian Bushfire Case Management System together? What is your advice to the Victorian Premier about setting up this Case Support Service?
Well, John, first off, can I call you John? I'm really pleased that you've called and asked to talk with me about this experience, because I think there are a lot of learnings. Probably one of the most important ones in setting up a service like case management or casework support was that they needed to be all things to all people. They needed to understand how to source food for animals. They needed to know about insurance, about banks, about trauma. They needed to understand about loss of income. They needed to be experts on everything. And they needed to be expert in about 1 hour from the time they were hired and asked to go out and meet with families. So I guess the most important thing we learned was to temper that expectation and also to equip case managers with a holistic assessment framework which would help them to identify issues like family violence, but equally backed up with support of who were the experts in that field, who can they turn to help get advice on how to respond to families where violence is happening, and how can they link them into specialist services. And that leads really to the second learning. And the second learning was around everybody really the community spirit about wanting to help and to respond, as Lynn has said, was true across the board. And it's really, how do we tap into that? So how do we tap into agencies who really do want to help and put them into helping in the right places? So how do we work with family violence organizations and domestic violence and have them ready to assist, to support the case managers with their knowledge and their expertise? And that's around surge capacity. That's a very topical word. How can you stop doing what you're normally doing to be able to resource an event that happens very quickly overnight? So you may already be fully engaged with a list of clients and have no capacity to address new clients. What do we do when that happens? How do we have that capacity to be able to say, well, when an event happens, we will have planned for that in advance so that we will have the capacity to reach out and support case managers and the communities as a whole. So I think that sort of pre-planning, I'm sure, is in that disaster policy. I'm sure in the intervening years we've all done a great deal of work to make sure we've got that capacity in our organizations. And probably the last thing I'd say is that the communities desperately really want to know what to expect. They want to hear from the experts in the field around what has just happened to them and what can they expect. And we ask the likes of Dr. Rob Gordon and others to go out and talk to communities and say, well, this is probably what's going on with you. This is what it means to be working on adrenaline, and this is how it's going to feel, and this is what you can expect in the days and the weeks to come. And probably what we need to do is grow those messages to include messages around, there are things that you can expect, like you will find it hard to sleep. You will find your attention span is shorter. You will find it hard to remember things. But we probably have to add into some of those messages those things that are pitfalls, dangers, risks that we need to look out for, which is to look out for violence, to look out for aggression. And I think we have to name these things in public meetings so that the community has permission to say, oh, these things might happen. I can look out for this, I can protect myself and others. And I think we have to be prepared to name in those community sessions, as well as the self-help skills, the things to do to help yourself. It's also permission to watch out for the warnings. I guess those are some of the things that I would share that I think would be helpful in the days ahead.
Chris Healy, back in 2011 you evaluated the case management response to Black Saturday. Before this worked on the reconstruction after the Canberra bushfires, and your PhD was on emergent groups after disasters. With all your experience and in your current position in 2016, you've got a new job as well, as Executive Director of the Australasian Evaluation Society. You're asked to advise on the new case support service. What advice do you give to prevent or respond to family violence?
Well, realistically, as the Prime Minister has said, we can't expect case managers to be expert on everything. We're not actually sure if we'll have case managers in disasters to come. We might call them different names, like recovery workers. But I think from what we heard this morning, we put too little emphasis on the possibility of family violence in 2009. And we certainly have to train our case managers or recovery workers in whatever training venues they are, like Mount Macedon and back in their home states. The other recommendation I would make is that the recording of family violence should also be explicit and not buried under other presenting issues like drug and alcohol abuse. I'm also comforted to hear what Gwen is saying about the work that's going on in the CFA, and I hope is going on in emergency services in other states around naming the fact that, yes, there can be family violence. And I agree with what Megan said this morning, that we need to know more about what is going on with men. What interventions can help here? We need more research and knowledge around men.
Thank you very much. So, essentially, it seems to me what you're saying, we're not hiding in the language anymore. We're actually naming, being explicit. Premier, are you with me? Yep. Thank you. You've become a politician very quickly, haven't you? There's no politicians here, no disrespect. You rushed back to Parliament House, and following the state disaster guidelines and the Prime Minister and Chris's advice, you actually assigned staff to ensure women and family violence services are included in all recovery bodies and to oversee a data gathering system. An opposition member, of course, brings it up in question time, saying, what a waste of time and money this is. There's no time, I'm going to try and do this in a whiny accent. There's no time thinking about gender and family violence. What is answer to do with? I hope you got that. Jan Cooper, is it a waste of time? In 2009, you were employed at the Women's DV Crisis Service and Resource Centre. What did you hear about family violence after Black Saturday?
Certainly not a waste of time. I guess at the time of Black Saturday, so I was working at Domestic Violence Resource Centre and Women's Domestic Violence Crisis Service. I should say that some of the stories I might tell right now could be distressing, so please look after yourself if you need to. I think I'll start with Domestic Violence Resource Centre. So basically I was answering telephones there, and what they do, they're a training organisation amongst many other things, but they train workers basically on how to respond to family violence. So in the weeks that followed Black Saturday, I got kind of an influx of calls from social workers who had been sent out into the field to do disaster recovery. And these workers were calling quite distressed, quite a bit of vicarious trauma happening for them, but certainly upset and saying things like, we didn't know we were coming out here to do family violence. I thought I was coming out here to do bushfire recovery. There's all this family violence, nobody prepared me for this, nobody trained me for this, I have no clue what's going on, please tell me how I'm supposed to respond. And they were trying to get into our training courses then, but of course our training courses were already full. We have long wait lists to get into the training in the first place, so it came down to me as a worker speaking with them one-on-one about how to respond to family violence, which is not an ideal way of trying to deal with it. At the same time, I was working at Women's Domestic Violence Crisis Service. Just a couple stories from there. One of them was a woman who was experiencing horrific abuse. and basically this was before Black Saturday, so the week before she had rang us. There were threats to kill from her partner. He had put a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill the children as well as a way to punish her. And this woman fled to her friend's house and called us from there and said, look, I'll be okay here for a few days, but I really need to go to refuge. And we talked that through with her. Okay, next Tuesday, you're going to come into refuge. And we made a plan with her. So Black Saturday happened, called her on Monday, and said, look, I just want to confirm you're ready to go to refuge on Tuesday. And this woman said, look, my house is burnt down, my community is completely devastated, I cannot go into refuge and I need to go back to my partner. And yes, he has said that he's going to kill us, but my community is really hurting and I need to go back and be with them and look after them. So that actually changed her plan. She had a plan of how to get out, and the bushfires meant that she went back into that situation. The other story I'll tell, and this one is quite distressing, and it chilled me for quite some time. The Friday night before Black Saturday, so I was doing the Friday overnight shift, so Friday 10:30 p.m. to Saturday 7:30 a.m. and received a call roughly about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was from a woman who, from the very beginning, I could tell she was extremely hopeless. That's probably the word I would use to explain how she was. And I was trying to figure out why. It's a very particular thing for a woman to ring you at 3 a.m. in the morning. Women don't ring at that time just to talk. They ring because something has just happened, or you get lots of police calls at the time when they've just gone out. But something specific was happening to this woman. It was gruesome abuse, including sexual abuse and horrific physical abuse and things that I won't go into because they're kind of too horrible to retell. But finally got to wondering, why is this woman calling me at 3 in the morning? What is the crisis right now? Because the partner wasn't even home, is what she had told me. And finally she told me where she was, which I won't repeat I won't say where she was, just to protect her identity, I suppose. But it was a very small town, and she told me that her neighbours were enacting their bushfire safety plans, basically. It was a very hot weekend, and her plan had always been that they were going to leave early. What happened that night at about 3 in the morning after they had a fight was her partner said, I hope there is a bushfire tomorrow, and I hope you die in it. And he took their car keys and he left. Now, this woman was quite fearful about the possibility of a bushfire coming. And I tried to talk through options with her. So certainly said, look, do you want to come into a refuge? I could get you out of there right now. She didn't want to come into a refuge. She didn't like the stigma that was around that. Okay, can you go to your neighbour's place? Well, my neighbours are 2 k's away and they don't know what's going on. I don't want to tell my community about this. Okay, well, who else is there? Where's your mum? My mum's in Melbourne. Well, can your mum come and pick you up and bring you back to Melbourne? Well, my mum doesn't know what's going on. I don't want to tell her all of this. So all of this, this woman felt extremely isolated and ended up in a situation where she decided she was just going to chance it, basically. She was going to stay and she was going to chance it. That's at least how the call ended at that time, I suppose. So.
And do you actually know what happened?
I have good reason to believe that this woman is alive. There's no way of knowing, okay? So it's an anonymous service. People don't have to give their name if they don't want to, but, in the months that followed when the Bushfire Commission started looking at, they actually followed the specific stories of each person who died. So they tracked the last phone calls that person made, what their plan was, what happened for them. So I was waiting for this call to come from the Bushfire Commission, and the call never came. And when the report finally did come out, and I looked through, I guess I didn't say this in the story, but this town was absolutely devastated in the bushfires, much worse than some. So it was absolutely devastated, and many people died, and many people lost their homes. But when the report finally did come out, basically I looked through every single person in that town who had died, and I don't think anybody matched the description of this woman. So perhaps she called her mother, perhaps she got extremely lucky that day, perhaps she spoke to the neighbours, I can't really tell.
Let's hope so. Let's also hope that the people who have been telling Deb and Claire that they don't believe the stories, perhaps they could spend a day with you or a shift with you on your next shift. Premier Burgess asks you to join a task group to draft a reply as to why the government needs to think about gender and family violence. What would you say?
Well, certainly besides the obvious of everything that we've talked about today, I guess I would be saying that this woman, in particular in the last story, just felt really disempowered. Her bushfire plan was him. He was her bushfire plan. So, you know, she vaguely thought, oh, I'm going to leave. But if she was stuck in a situation like that, she didn't have any other plans except, all right, we're going to do what my partner says. He's going to protect me. She was unprepared for it. So we do need to be looking at gender in response, but also in preparedness. You know, we need to make sure that women actually feel strong enough to go into a bushfire situation and make important decisions in emergency situations. So I would say targeting women in bushfire preparedness plans and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Actually, Lynn, you're also invited to participate, so it's a task group to draft a reply as to why the government needs to think about gender and family violence. What are you going to say about the situation?
Premier Burgess, I really am pleased you've called this together, because the learnings of Black Saturday have to be put out there. And if we can help those people for the future, then I'm sure these policies that you've now put into place are going to do exactly that. And this task force has got a huge job in front of it. It needs to be able to, and I think, through legislative powers, legislation has to be followed through. That people in authority are going to not just enact what they know the policies need to be, but that they are also in the position of being flexible. Because what is happening out in our communities is so vitally important to their recovery that they have to have the confidence that what you're putting into place is what they actually need and the services they need. And we've learned a lot of that. We've also learned that, as part of that whilst we need to understand and know what may be going to go on, we need to put in place what might minimise the problems and situations, and where people can go to for help and advice and assistance. And they need to be out in the field. They don't need to be sitting in an office in Collins Street. So get the people and the support groups out into the communities. Allow them and you've really done a great job here, Premier, because beforehand you've trained people in these roles, and they know the roles, and there's people in the communities who have been trained in these roles, and they're out on the ground right now, because after every disaster, who are the first people that are there? The communities themselves. So, by putting in the policies that you've put into place, these people are there on the ground, and they're running. They're not just walking, they're running. And they're actively out there doing the job that needs to be done to assist these communities and to minimise and get in and work effectively in all the issues, particularly family violence, alcoholism. You've got people, at the right places where, sadly, people get distressed and abuse starts to happen, personal abuse, and this then leads to further violence in the homes. So I'm really pleased that you can take on board some of these things, the policies that you've put in place, and that you're going to be flexible when you see there's issues and problems, that we can actually work through them together in partnership with the community.